Is there such a thing as the perfect computer game? Well, in this video we are going to take a look at what made some of those memorable, epic, generation-defining games so unforgettable. But were any of them perfect? Firstly though, let's get the obvious out of the way. Experiences are subjective and gaming is no different. My top 5 games of all time will almost certainly be different to your top 5 games. So we need to find some common ground, and I think the best place to start is with the components of what made those 10 out of 10 games so unforgettable. In no particular order then, first up we have audio, which is actually quite a broad subject covering both music and sound effects. Audio has that unique, almost magical property to it, whereby it can almost instantaneously transport you back to the point in life when you first heard that piece of music or sound effect. When I think about iconic original soundtracks, games like Sonic, Mario, Command & Conquer Red Alert, or perhaps more recently, God of War and Skyrim come to mind. On the flip side, franchises like Need for Speed, Grand Theft Auto and Tony Hawk all absolutely hit it out of the park when it came to selecting popular music that matched the era and the audience of the game. I distinctly remember first being introduced to bands like Powerman 5000 and Goldfinger in the original release of Tony Hawk on the PlayStation. I'd constantly restart levels over and over just to get those epic tracks to power me through to a decent score. Equally, sound effects can invoke the same level of nostalgia. A great example of that is the Final Fantasy Victory fanfare. It's iconic, to the point that some people even use that as a ringtone for their phone. Now, indulge me just for a moment. Close your eyes, listen to the following sound effects, and see if you can identify what games they're from.
Get over here! Hadouken! Bomb has been planted.
Some of those sound effects were over 30 years old, and yet they were instantly recognisable. When game developers get audio that right, they're onto a winner. A game's visuals are super important, but shouldn't be confused with state-of-the-art graphics. Don't get me wrong, I would fully expect every new version of Call of Duty or FIFA or any sports sim game for that matter to look better and better with each new iteration. But a game doesn't need to have realistic state-of-the-art graphics to be successful. You need look no further than Minecraft, one of the most popular games of all time, to realise that. If next-gen graphics were critical to a game's success, we wouldn't have an indie games industry at all, let alone a thriving one. Earlier this year, Vampire Survivors, one of the most visually basic looking games that you can buy, beat the likes of Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok to win the BAFTA for the best game of 2023. Good game visuals are more about having what's presented in front of you, matching the style and type of game that you're playing. A great example of this is Borderlands. Gearbox created a completely unique style and look for that series, which perfectly lined up with the type of fun, comic book-like game that it was. It just worked. Another great example is Death Stranding. A game where I still can't quite put my finger on why I loved it so much, but either way, some of its scenery had an almost landscape photography feel to it. It added depth to the game and made all that running around slightly more tolerable. Solid visuals are absolutely paramount when it comes to a character's appearance. Iconic characters like Cloud Strife, Lara Croft, Link, the Master Chief, Mario, Sonic, and you know what? Even Pikachu all have fantastic visual appeal that matches their environment. As an artist or developer, you know you've struck visual graphical gold when someone is willing to spend considerable amounts of their effort, time and money recreating that character's appearance in real life. Some games like Slay the Spire, Audio Surf, or that old favourite of mine, Vampire Survivors, are mouse-only games, and as far as controls are concerned, are very basic, but effective. In my opinion, there are two good tests for quality controls. The first is, once you've got used to a game, do you need to keep going back into the menu to remind yourself what those controls are? In other words, have the controls become second nature, leaving you to enjoy the game without consciously having to think about what your hands are doing. The second is, if you have a little break from a game, how long does it take for you to get that controller muscle memory back when you pick it back up again? I recently restarted playing Spider-Man Miles Morales, and after a few minutes realised that actually I was just enjoying the flow of the game. I wasn't having to think about the buttons that I was pressing. That to me was testament to the game's quality control system. Compare that to something like World of Warcraft, where at one point it was actually trendy to buy an entire keyboard just to cope with the number of keybinds you needed. Even now, in modern WoW, by the time you've unlocked most of your class abilities, you've already keybound numbers 1 to 6 and letters Q, E, R, T, F, V, plus all of their Shift, Control, and Alt variations. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. WoW is a comparatively complex game, but it does pose a bit of a barrier to entry for new players. Gamers like to be challenged. There's nothing quite like that feeling when you've been battling against that optional boss and finally managed to do it. Alternatively, in a game like Legend of Zelda, curiosity and exploration play a key part of the challenge behind completing the game. Some games take challenge to a whole different level, much like the Souls games, where you're expected to die a lot. And the rewards for your effort isn't so much an epic piece of gear or an ability or a skin. The reward is the feeling of accomplishment itself. On the flip side, ARPGs like Diablo are very much about those dopamine-laced loot explosions where legendary gear flies out of the boss you just downed at an almost ridiculous rate. It's easy to forget just how much the games industry has changed over the years. We now have multiple ways to select difficulty that matches our own gaming prowess. We have autosave in the cloud, and if we get stuck, the solution to our problem is only a few clicks away. Go back 30 years and none of those conveniences existed. If you died and ran out of lives, that was it. You've got to restart the whole game. If you wanted to save your progress, you couldn't. You just had to leave your console on all night. And there was no quick Googling or YouTubing if you got stuck. You had to walk down to your nearest paper shop or supermarket and buy whatever the newest version of Games Master was. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction to this video, there are going to be some games where story just simply doesn't matter. Online first-person shooters like Counter-Strike, Battlefield and Call of Duty, they don't need a story. Nor does Rocket League, City Skylines and most sports games. But genres of games that are story heavy, like RPGs, must get that right. Say what you will about the sequel, the original Last of Us was absolutely outstanding. The bond you built and felt between Ellie and Joel was remarkable, and the level of mental anguish you experienced playing those last scenes in the game was unparalleled. Games with memorable, engaging stories usually revolve around a single mystery or plot. Silent Hill 2, which is another example of a great game with a great story, was centred around a mystery letter received from the lead character's supposedly dead wife. The Witcher 3 was centred around Geralt's search for his adoptive daughter, and Red Dead Redemption 2's botched bank robbery led to the fight for survival for Arthur and the rest of the Van der Linde gang. They all created a hook right at the beginning which continued to twist and turn right up to the conclusion of the story. In my experience, you know you're playing a game with a great story when you start to form those emotional attachments to either the character that you're playing or the characters that you're interacting with. Their fate and well-being really starts to matter. And whether the game has a happy ending or not, that sort of feeling of despair grips you, knowing that you're never going to create any new stories with those characters. You only have the option of either replaying or recreating them. Thanks to the interactive nature of computer games, developers have the opportunity to create entire worlds to be explored. Some in a linear sense, but some in a completely free and open world. Gone are the days where all you had to choose from was sideways and vertical scrolling games, although plenty of them are still perfectly enjoyable even today. Level design and environment are critically important, no matter what the genre of the game. The Witcher 3, God of War and Dark Souls are all excellent examples of open world games that got the environment absolutely spot on. In the world of puzzle games, Portal 2, in my opinion, reigns as king. The level design in that game was amazing, and while the puzzles got more and more difficult as the game progressed, the difficulty never really felt out of reach. The entire premise of the game relied on the quality of the level design, which is why it's such a standout example. There was no filler in any of the puzzle rooms, everything had a purpose, and you could use the environment to your advantage. With the right mix of the right components comes immersion. And that's really what it's all about. If you start to feel a little bit like the character you're playing, that's immersion. If you get lost in a story, an environment, a battle, a match, a competition, that's immersion. Games that create immersion are games that succeed. They're the type of game that you just can't wait to pick back up after a day at work or a day at school. You can play them for hours and hours and completely lose track of time. Games that give you those kinds of experiences will stick with you for life. Throughout the course of this video, I have mentioned more than a handful of truly epic, timeless, memorable games. But were any of them perfect? In all honesty, I think it's too subjective to say, but when I think about all of those components that make a perfect game, there is one game that stands out to me, and that is the original Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. It had absolutely everything: a phenomenal original music soundtrack, fantastic characters, beautiful FMV sequences, simple control, excellent gameplay, and an immersive open world containing zones full of character. And the story, man, the story. It is one of the only games that I've gone back to time and time again and have played on any platform that will support it. So, in my humble opinion, the original Final Fantasy VII is as close as you can get to gaming perfection. Now, I know with 100% certainty that there are going to be way more people that disagree with me than agree with me about that. So come on, let me have it. Let me know in the comments, what's your idea of gaming perfection? Oh, and if you want an example of something that's on the opposite side of that coin, you should check out my previous video on the current state of Diablo 4.